Welcome back to the CEFA Mini Pod. Today we're here with Sebastian Naur from Strategy and we are going to talk about transitioning from being a student to a full-time employee. Welcome, Sebastian. Nice to have you here and having a little talk about how it is to enter from being a student to a full-time employee. Maybe you could start out by telling a bit about yourself and your background.
Yes, of course, and thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with this interview. So I studied economics at Copenhagen University. I graduated in February, and hereafter I joined Strategy and. So I'm still pretty new there. So during my studies, I also studied for a semester at Berkeley, and and was sort of taking courses a little, not in a specific direction, but just what I thought was interesting. During my studies, I also worked at EY, which is what sparked my interest for consulting. And then when I graduated, I've heard about Strategy and so I applied and I joined. Yeah.
Sounds like a straight path, as if you knew exactly what you wanted to do from the beginning.
No, I've been very much around. When I started, I thought I was going to do in ministry or in the central bank or something. But then my direction kind of changed and towards the more the consulting world.
Yeah. Okay. So transitioning from being a full-time student to being a full-time employee.
Yeah.
How was that?
It's a change, I think. I think the thing that hits you the most, I think, is the change of pace. So you're used to like being able to dive down and just read the materials and then just to really concentrate and focus. Whereas here you kind of you change pace quite a bit. You have to like be mentally prepared, and you're being pushed or thrown into the deep end of the pool, and you just have to swim back. I think is sort of the way I experience it. So, for instance, my second day on the job, I was at a project, public project, where my second day I was alone with the client and had to do sit in and working closely together with the CFO or the CFO equivalent at the client's site. So yeah, you just have to suck it up and just dive in, I think.
Yeah. It must be really hard when you're sitting there and being fresh out of college and you don't necessarily have the knowledge. What do you do then? I
think that's something you need to prepare for when you graduate, and if you enter consulting, is just to be mentally prepared to just take the plunge and to be confident in yourself enough that you can sit and actually deliver at a client site, despite your lack of experience or like your very short tenure. So just be brave enough to actually dive in. I think that's sort of one of the best advice I can give to a newly started consultant.
Yeah. So what would you have done differently, or could something have been even better in that transitioning period?
I think maybe just to actually build up the courage to actually plunge, to take the plunge in the first place. I think it's an important thing, and I think just to actually think about this before you start, I also think is a good thing, because that's the best way to learn when you're on the job, to actually just do what you need to do, and don't be afraid of making errors or anything like that. So I think just building up the courage to do that, I think that's an important thing to do in the beginning.
Yeah. So besides building up courage, what would you deem a very relevant or a plus in terms of technical skills?
Well, I've benefited a lot from, my background is very technical, like very analytical. We do a lot of math and statistics at Copenhagen University and economics, and I think that has benefited me quite well. And it's not about like what you do in school or the courses you take. It's more about the mindset or the analytical approach to solving a problem. I think that's by far the biggest contributor to your job as a consultant.
Okay.
And I think if we're talking about software skills or anything, I don't think it's a huge plus to be the master of Excel when you begin or something. You quickly pick it up if you have the right mindset and if you have the right analytical approach. Of course, it can be a plus that it's not completely new for you, but I don't think that's the most important thing. I think the most important thing is just having a logical and analytical approach to doing your job.
Yeah, okay. And that logical and analytical approach is something you train a lot as a student, and then you simply try to apply that once you graduate, or?
I mean, yes, of course. When you start, you kind of do it by trial and error. But you always have good colleagues around you to guide you, and like you shouldn't be afraid of if you have a problem that you simply can't solve, then reach out and ask someone, because there's always someone to ask, I think. And so you have to be able to stand on your own legs, but you always have support if you're in doubt.
So, besides having technical skills, what soft skills would you recommend developing as a student?
I think it's an important thing to be able to communicate efficiently, or to be able to get a message across, which is easy to understand and which is clear. And I think that's, at least from my studies at economics, that's not something you train that well and that much in your time in school. So I think it's a good skill to acquire on your own, be it at a student position or extracurricular activities or anything. But I think it's important to actually get that skill built out pretty quickly, I think.
Yeah. Did you have anything in particular where you trained that skill?
Well, during my studies, I also I was a TA, teacher assistant, so I taught some classes in mainly macroeconomics actually. But so just to be able to articulate that message and being able to stand in front of people and talk, I think that's what helped me at least. Of course, it's very individual what you need to do, but I think articulating a message clearly and so it's easy to understand, I think that's really important.
As a last question, if you had to give your student self 3 pieces of advice, what would they be?
Okay, I think the first thing I would say, and that's not just for me, but in general, I think don't pick your courses based on what you think an employer might like or anything. Well, of course, to some extent, but actually pick the courses that you actually find interesting. One of the best courses I've had was at Berkeley. I studied environmental economics there, which I have no use for right now, but I think it was really interesting. And so enjoy the course that you take and don't think about what you might apply after in your work, because the stuff that you haven't taught in college you'll easily pick up when you start. My second advice would be to get a student position and do it early on in your studies, because that's a great way to actually find out where are your interests, what do you see yourself doing when you graduate. And then my third advice would be to dive into some extracurricular activities and be a part of the social scene in your university as well.
Yeah.
I think being part of either being a tutor or being in some of I was part of a case competition, which benefited me greatly, and become a contestant at that, I think that's very important. Also, a good way to build out your network as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, those would be my 3 advices, I think.
So Sebastian, that was it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for following and watching this video. Next time we'll be here at Essentia, so stay tuned.